Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to the open door. I have left an open door before you, which no one can close. Open to the love of God. Open to joining his stream of love for others. And on our panel today, we have Dr. Rhonda Chervin, Professor of Philosophy and writer of numerous books about Catholic living. And she is in Corpus Christi, Texas. And then we have Mitzi. And I don't have your
Hellman.
What?
Mitzi Hellman.
There, Mitzi Hellman. Yeah, I gotta get that written down.
Esquire.
Okay. Mitzi Hellman. And Mitzi, as Jim was pointing out, is a lawyer. And we also, of course, have our fearless leader, Dr. Jim Hannock from Los Angeles, philosophy professor, father of 5 children, pro-life activist, editor at New Oxford Review. So, Jim, take it away.
Well, good morning to everyone. It's still fairly early morning here in Los Angeles, also known as La Ciudad de Los Ángeles Casi Perdidos, the city of the almost lost angels. At any rate, we here in Los Angeles are very much acquainted with the question of border security and immigration, as are all our participants from South Texas, as is our dear friend Mitzi, who is herself a lawyer who deals with immigration questions. I'm going to follow our usual pattern here. I want to read the first paragraph of the American Solidarity Party's platform plank, titled Border Security and Immigration. And that's followed by 5 bullet points. And we can take them one by one. But I'll go with the first paragraph to start. The American Solidarity Party recognizes and affirms the essential contributions of immigrants to our culture, economy, and national identity. We call for a complete reform of our immigration laws, including creating pathways to citizenship for eligible immigrants currently residing unauthorized within our borders. While recognizing the threat posed by organized crime along our southern border, we are opposed to excessive militarization and fortification. We recognize that the causes of immigration are complex and multifaceted, and we will work towards international and domestic policies that will make immigration a choice rather than a necessity. In reading that, I had 2 initial thoughts. We have a sentence that says we call for a complete reform of our immigration laws. I suppose that a thorough reform of our immigration laws would be more accurate, and that I'm certainly sure that some one immigration law or other is okay as it stands. So perhaps we could remove complete and put in thorough. And then farther down we have, while recognizing the threat posed by organized crime along our southern border, we are opposed to its excessive militarization. I imagine if we take words for what they are, everyone is opposed to excessive militarization. Imagine even the president would not want to move our entire armed forces to the border. So instead of excessive militarization, we might have some other adjective there. Other than that, I have no problem at all with this introductory paragraph, but perhaps others have comments to make. Panel.
Well, I'll start. I'd like to touch on what you said about being opposed to the excessive militarization of the border. I think, sure, everyone can agree. Okay, well, we don't want excessive militarization. But just what, and you're absolutely right. Just what you call excessive is. People vary on what they consider excessive. For myself personally, I think this idea of a impenetrable border wall is a bit much. It's expensive. It's I actually think it'll increase illegal immigration for various reasons, but. A lot of what we wanted to do in drafting this platform is trying to, we want to give candidates a lot of room to propose individual policies without locking them into anything too specific. We do have people in the party who think the border wall, is worth considering, as opposed as I am to that. We certainly don't want anyone to think, well, I'm not going to run for office if I can't. If I'm locked into these specifics here, but we do just want to provide the language that allows people to say, no, look, I think that's excessive there. We all agree that the human trafficking and the drug smuggling on the border is a problem, but we target that. Do we need to be spending billions of dollars on non-problems? And what the non-problems are, again, is kind of subject to what an individual candidate would, consider. But we want to frame it within a general idea that, we do want to make it, we do want to reform immigration laws so that we don't have the problems that we have.
Yes. Rhonda, do you have a comment at this point?
Of course, I always have a comment. Okay, I'm thinking in my youth, my atheist youth, we used to sing this song as when I was a teenager at these sort of hootenannies, they were called. And the song said, La tierra, será senza frontera. And the idea was that the ideal would be that there were no borders at all. And somehow that fitted itself into my psyche, so much so that when I was teaching Catholic ethics as a Catholic, and I came upon the very good Catholic bishops, I think both statements, but anyway, the first statement, when it said, of course, countries have a right to have borders. And that sort of surprised me, actually, because I've never studied the area of political philosophy. So I was sort of surprised. I didn't take that for granted, actually, because of that little song and what it seemed to mean, But no one who's in politics believes you could just get rid of law and everybody would be happy, and you don't need any boundaries, property laws. People should just be hippie forests. So no one still thinks that exactly, or at least very few. And so once you have in place the idea that there's a right to have a border, which also fits in a certain way, I've been thinking about this a lot, fits with the subsidiarity aspect of the American Solidarity Party's political philosophy. So if you need small units, you know, the whole world isn't a small unit. So if you say there are no borders, there's just worldwide humanity, and anyone can go anywhere, and why do you need law and order at all? So those are some of the things floating in my mind. So once you have that having borders is a legitimate part of natural law involving nation states, then obviously you can't have a situation where, according to what many people say, you know, half these people are, even if they're not drug dealers, they're not against it either necessarily, et cetera, you know, on and on and on. So that's not a small problem, because according to what people say here, now maybe this is just Texas, but people say that there are all these jobs and people can't get the jobs because they have to pass a drug test. And that 60% of the people can't pass a drug test. So this isn't a small little problem. So those are the things swirling around in my head.
Well, you know, and Rhonda, I'll be the first to say, I consider myself pretty far, you know, left on issues of immigration. But when we were drafting this section, I was honestly one of the more conservative voices about it. One of my big concerns is, you know, one, we do have a huge problem with human trafficking at the border, and that needs to be addressed. We can't have, I mean, these things that are happening are horrific, and we just have a responsibility to, you know, the vulnerable people in our society to, you know, try to protect them. The other big concern that I had is we're gang members. There's probably no one who dislikes the MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang more than me. And that's because they're in my community now, and they're attacking my clients. And a lot of my clients are running from them. So, you know, my rationale in pointing this out to people was, look, you know, we need to, you know, the previous iteration of the platform called for amnesty, was the word they used. And me being this, you know, ultra-leftist, you know, welcome the stranger, you know, Jesus was a refugee, immigration attorney, said, whoa, wait a minute, amnesty for who? Because, for example, you know, any misdemeanor involving gang participation does not carry a very heavy, you know, prison sentence, if it carries one at all. I mean, a lot of them are misdemeanors, you know, punishable by a maximum of 1 year. Do we really want, you know, these, you know, gang members back out on the streets after a year? I mean, but it's next to impossible to save them from deportation. And so I said, look, I mean, like I said, I was one of the more conservative voices about that issue, and I'm the one who, you know, kind of tried to tone down the language a bit. So, you know, I mean, yeah, we do have borders, and, you know, for example, I think that this is a time that the borders come in handy. Like, okay, you know what, you know, you may not be committing a crime that is, you know, punishable by, you know, I mean, we can't lock you up for the rest of your life for it, nor do we want to, because that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's not practicable, and it's not humane. However, you don't have any other reason to be here. You need to go home. I mean, you know, we know what you're up to, and this is no good. So, you know, and that was a big concern of mine.
Very interesting, very interesting.
You
know, I was...
Go ahead, please.
I was really affected by something that happened here in the D.C. area. There was just a tragic murder of a young girl. She was 15, and I read about her. Her mother had smuggled her up here from El Salvador because she was getting her mother had been living here for 10 years, working and sending money home, and the child had been living in El Salvador with her grandparents. But the girl starts coming of age, and in El Salvador, that's an extremely dangerous time for girls because of the gangs. The gangs, it's just a horrendous how they, what happens to young women who get targeted by these gangs. And so the mother smuggles her up here to the United States to save her. But the girl, understandably had a hard time adjusting, and fell in with the gang who were here, the MS-13 gang members who were here, and she was murdered. And it really hit me because I have, oh my gosh, probably 100 clients just like that girl.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
Yeah, it really affected me because I thought that girl could have been any one of my clients. And, I want to have compassion for everyone, but, we have to, we do have to balance this kind of compassion for immigrants with public safety. And I understand that public safety involves being compassionate. The compassion for immigrants can include, public safety, issues. It's not very compassionate to be, providing, I like the way that we're providing legal avenues for these kids to escape the horrible situation in El Salvador right now, but we're not being very compassionate if we're letting them escape only to have the same sort of thing going on here.
Perhaps at this point I could make a couple of comments, and they're really all based on points that Rhonda and Mitzi have made. With regard to the M13 gang, as far as I know, that started in Los Angeles, and is itself connected with, dependent on, and ultimately directed by what for decades here in Los Angeles we've referred to as the Mexican Mafia. So the whole business of M13 is especially atrocious, but it is well entrenched. And I don't know what to say about that immediately in terms of policy, but any policy we have has to be based on empirical facts, and that's one. Another point is, and this connects with the notion of sovereignty, I'm a great fan of, I won't say disciple because I disagree at many points, but nonetheless a great fan of the late French philosopher Jacques Maritain. And repeatedly in his works in political philosophy, he challenges the notion of any kind of absolute sovereignty. There is only one ultimate sovereign, the creator of the universe. On the other hand, he supports the idea of subsidiarity, and he calls attention to political entities that can best represent groups, which groups have a kind of nationality about them. And while Maritain was instrumental in completing and shepherding and working on and even drafting to some extent the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, again and again Maritain would say, we can't have any kind of universal government without some kind of fundamental recognition of proper political units that have some link with more natural groupings. Now, that's a balance that I'm sure we'll be trying to operate with as long as we have political structures whatsoever. Another point that I'd like to interject here is that it sometimes, I think, might help us if we did a kind of a reversal. We're thinking of immigration and immigrants coming to us. Well, suppose from time to time we turn things around and thought in terms of our own migration, our own emigration, our own going someplace else. In that case, we might raise a question like, should I wish to leave this country and go to another country, what country ought to? Is there any country that has an obligation to take me in? And under what circumstances? So if you reverse the order, you come to think about the larger problem from different perspectives. Couple of other things, and then I'll rest in pieces for a bit. Dorothy Day, who was certainly a friend of the immigrant and certainly a friend of the homeless, would from time to time make disparaging comments about Holy Mother the State. And it's not as if she thought that there couldn't be some sort of justified political order. But she hadn't seen one, and so she emphasized personal responsibility and what she called houses of hospitality. But even there, she said, better than a house of hospitality would be a Christ room, that individuals who had homes would set aside for the stranger. So, Holy Mother of the State, well, maybe, but most of the states have not been Holy Mothers. Houses of hospitality, good idea, but the best thing would be if individual Christians and individual humanists, insofar as it was possible for them to do so, exercised personal responsibility and took people in, or at least one person in. I recall not so very long ago, and this is something that was, I think, initiated by Paulo Freire. We had this idea of each one, teach one. Each one, teach one. That would be the level of education. So those are a few thoughts to add to the pot.
Well, because of Dorothy Day, now why am I having an echo?
Just go through it.
It doesn't matter. The echo won't be on the radio show itself?
Oh, it'll be absolute perfection. Let the chambers echo as they might.
Okay. So, it's better now. So, okay. So because of Dorothy Day and this policy, I did exactly this. I was in an apartment, very cheap apartment in North Carolina because I wanted to be near one of my daughters. And I had an extra bedroom. I wanted a one-bedroom, but they only had two-bedroom apartments in this little complex right near the church. So I thought of this whole policy of Dorothy Day where they said what we need is beds. We'll take care of all the other problems of the person with our social workers, et cetera, but then we need a place for them to stay. So this was an extremely interesting experience. They said, you take in someone for a week. Well, this was a couple of years, but anyway.
One thing leads to another.
Yeah. But the very funny part is they brought me to meet my potential person, And I looked like the street person, and she was a Pentecostal singer who looked like Marilyn Monroe. So I looked like the person who needed a home, right? So that was very funny. But anyhow, so I really loved this woman, and we got along great, et cetera, et cetera. Well, she was she had been battered by her husband. She had these kids, two of the who were not battered by the father, but she was battered by the father of the kids. And some of these kids, one of these kids, by the way, came to be because of a Christian pro-life center. She wasn't married, and she went to the Christian pro-life center and had one of the babies. So that was wonderful. So anyway, so the long and short of it is, eventually she gets the two teenage girls, the last girls in the family, away from her husband, the batterer, simply because his new girlfriend didn't like these very pretty young girls around, because she was jealous of them. So he dumped them on me. So now I have 3 people in this bedroom, and then I had to leave town. So I got her minister to find her a place to live, and because she now had the kids, she could get this place to live right near the soup kitchen. Terrific, all right? So it seems like a very happy ending. So she writes to me and says,
let's hear it.
Yeah, so she writes me a letter, and she says, now my teenage daughters are battering me. So that was kind of a very horrible ending to this story. But the reason I'm mentioning it is not because I think people shouldn't take people in, but a whole thing I feel about when we're talking about these principles is it never gets into these kind of nitty-gritty things. You're thinking of the homeless person as simply a victim, and then you're thinking, if I take this person in, then I will be able to protect them from these evil people, right? But but then the evil people turn out maybe to be the kids of this same wonderful woman. So it's just, you see what I mean? It's just so, the problems in a society like ours now, the degree of evil in the society itself makes me pessimistic because, it's going to leak out in some other way.
Well, we know from Hebrew Scripture, unless the Lord builds the city, they build in vain who would build the city. So that's certainly the case, and I think people engaged in policy ought to recognize that, but I think people engaged in on-the-ground activity also have to recognize their limits. Interesting parallel here, sort of interesting. Whenever an Islamist group makes real headway, the interviews and the background reading that we do points out that the Islamist group made real headway because it provided local services, not because there was some embrace of Islamic extremism, but because the people in the Islamist groups were there and actually did something of worth at the local level. That's certainly been the case with regard to Hezbollah in Lebanon, and at least at different stages in these endless conflicts. It's been the case in Afghanistan, and the case in Iraq, and the case in Syria. So your point about how we have to actually do something for people spins off in various directions. One, we can't do as much as we might think we could do, but we have to do what we can do. And then from the policy level, the policies are, as articulated, often not even read by or made familiar to great masses of people, and the great masses of people would be interested in making it through till the end of the week, which we can often do. Now, as I sometimes said while teaching, on the third hand, if we look at global statistics, lies, damn lies, and global statistics, but if we look at global statistics, the percentage of people in absolute poverty has actually gone down over the past several decades. Not the absolute number, because there are more people, there are going to be more people in absolute poverty, but the percentage of people in absolute poverty has actually gone down. So at some level, some approaches have worked even globally.
Oh, that's very important. That's very important. Well, I like this principle, Jim, that you raised, which just because you can try to do something good and you don't get the result that you wanted in some way because of all these complicated aspects of the various faces of evil in the society, you still have to do something. So what am I really saying is,
don't be a cockeyed optimist or a rosy-eyed romantic.
Well, no, but the way the thing is worded, the platform, it gives this impression that victims have no sins themselves.
Well, you know, I'll bring up an interesting point about immigration law. Yeah, I mean, we do talk about, you know, one of the first bullet point here is, you know, there's a generous policy of asylum for migrants fleeing persecution and violent conflict. And this also touches on, you know, something Dr. Hennig asked about, you know, under what conditions should another country be obligated to take someone in? Asylum is one of them, I think. You know, we do have an international law about asylum, and we have the Convention Against Torture. I don't know that countries are necessarily obligated to take in refugees. However, once someone is in, you know, many countries, including the United States, they do have a right under international law to request asylum, or for, you know, to at least avoid deportation under the Convention Against Torture. Now, what's interesting is with asylum, it is discretionary. Even once, you know, an adjudicator has determined that the person fleeing, you know, is in fact fleeing persecution based on a protected ground. And then that's a whole other issue. But once that has been determined, there is still an element of discretion there. The immigration judge or the asylum officer still has the discretion to say, okay, even though you do meet this threshold, you're, you know, for very, I don't think you merit a favorable exercise of discretion. And there are absolute bars based on someone's criminal record. Interestingly, though, when it comes to something like the Convention Against Torture, you have a much higher threshold to meet to show, you know, that you're eligible to avoid deportation under the Convention Against Torture. It's much harder to show that you know, the level of threat to you rises to that level. But once you've shown that, I'm sorry.
I hear you now, but I was not hearing you for a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, once you've reached, you know, once you've been able to demonstrate, you know, that the risk that you face rises to the level where you merit protection under the Convention Against Torture, you cannot be deported, at least to the country where you face that threat. And so I think I think that immigration law now does recognize that not all who are fleeing persecution are sinless victims, and they do recognize that some of these people might not be, necessarily the kind of people we want in this country. Nevertheless, I think there is a wonderful kind of life-affirming caveat to the Convention Against Torture, basically saying, you know what, if we know that you're going to be tortured in your country and that the government is going to be a part of it, it is absolutely forbidden to send someone back into that kind of situation.
Well, this is where the whole platform would have to be in place, though, because we are saying, in effect, we have a country in which babies in the womb are being tortured, 60 million strong, and we're the country that's going to protect people against torture. So unless you got the other elements of the unless we got the other elements of the platform in place, isn't there something inconsistent there?
Well, I'm telling you, I mean, what I just described is how immigration law works now. I mean, I described a system that is already in place. But bringing up to the second point, within that first bullet, where we call upon the United States to fulfill its obligations under international law, I think is where we have an issue. Right now, whether and to what extent immigrants are being provided, the opportunity to apply for asylum or to apply for protection under the Convention Against Torture is a question. Where even though the law says that people who are fleeing persecution have this right, and those who are who have strong claims that they will be tortured back in their country have an absolute right to stay here, or to at least avoid deportation to that country.
Oh yeah, no, I understand that. I understand that's a wonderful thing in itself. It's just striking me as very inconsistent that a country who is invoking international law on torture of adults is busy torturing the babies in the womb and considering it an absolute right of women.
Well, I think there are profound inconsistencies, but in some regards, it's like a sailboat. You can't repair the whole boat at once. You have to repair this part of the boat in order to repair that part of the boat, and that's one of the reasons why we say, Lord, teach us to know how much we need your mercy and to realize how much we have your mercy. We certainly need it, and you're pointing out that inconsistency points to a profound need for mercy on our part. But let me push ahead a little bit to compare and contrast. And you've been getting us to compare and contrast. The first bullet point, and I think Mitzi's good to get us moving past the paragraph that launches the bullet point. The first bullet point says, a generous policy of asylum. A generous policy of asylum. Now, what the platform does there is appeal to a virtue. And one of the things that Virtue Talk does is to take us past trying to thread needles on various points. And I am not for a second discounting the need for rigorous analysis of what's involved in a right. How many times people talk about rights without saying, well, who would have the obligation to recognize that right that you propose? and oftentimes rights language is aspirational. Wouldn't it be wonderful if? And so we need to talk about a right clearly. And when we talk about a right clearly, lawyers, for example, are familiar with what's called the Hofeldian right, where a right is a claim to something against someone recognized by law. Now, you don't have to be a lawyer to have this basic structure, and so you'd say a right is a claim to something against someone recognized by law and or morality. But of course, when you come to the recognition by law and or morality, you got to say which law and which ethical vision. And so that definition just gets us started, practically speaking, but it's something to get started. We have a conceptual framework. And I'm pleased to see that what we say here is we're going to have a generous policy. And I don't think we have a generous policy now. And parallel at the level of individuals, I don't think individual Americans have a generous policy of welcoming strangers, much less welcoming them into their homes. So there's a massive need for conversion here.
Well, to
and I'm only going to charge a nickel for that sermon.
I think that what this calls to, and I hate to backtrack, but I think calling for a generous policy is consistent with kind of trying to foster a consistent culture of affirming life, and affirming the sanctity of human life. And that's what asylum law is about. It's about protecting people's lives, saving people's lives. And so if we can foster, I almost feel like and lately I've been trying to kind of engage more leftist activists within our party, but and part of this is, to me, I aspire to evangelize and to go forth and proclaim, the name of Christ all. But I feel like if you can get people on board, with this idea of the sanctity of human life, when we talk about immigrants, when we talk about prisoners, talk about other groups, then you can kind of sow the seeds to get them to recognize the sanctity of life in the womb. And so,
hopefully, yeah. Maybe sometime, Jim, we could have a program about that whole issue of, okay, if I vote for the American Solidarity Party, which has very little chance of winning. When you vote for it, Rhonda? When? What? When? Okay. I'm taking the vote away from the only candidate who came out pro-life on abortion. So even though that same candidate is weak on, I don't agree with on immigration, meanwhile, I wish we could discuss that issue sometime. Because I think a lot of people will feel that way who agree with the whole platform. They won't want to vote for a tiny party if there's any candidate that's pro-life on the abortion issue.
Well, I think a lot of the people that we've been lifetime friends with will have that view, but I think that what they oftentimes lose track of is that they're a tiny minority of the electorate. And that doesn't mean that they should change their view, but we need to try lots of different things in lots of different ways. And there's a whole further dimension of this. Growing up insofar as I ever did, growing up at the Catholic Worker, I have a strong anarchist bent. And the idea that a huge country is going to somehow work with two dominant political parties seems to me to be wildly implausible. So I think anything we can do to get that log jam broken, not anything we can do, but a great many things that we do to get that log jam broken would be very worthwhile. Gosh, I'd like to throw in one more thing here, a kind of a broader thing. When we go back and forth from the person to the community, from the citizen to the state, sometimes looking at the state helps us to understand the citizen. That was certainly Plato's view. And sometimes it works in the other direction. Looking at the person helps us to understand the community. And when you look to ethical questions, you see that same back and forth coming into play. Aquinas, as we know, we've discussed this on different occasions, constantly emphasized what's called today the universal destination of goods. The earth and all of creation doesn't belong to people who have seen surveyors, but ultimately it belongs to everyone. By the same token, we have to work in groups. That's our very nature, to work in groups. But at the individual level, when someone we meet is in imminent danger and no other remedy is available, then our property can only be used well if we use it to help that person.
Okay, that's what I saw. That's what I saw with the hurricane. People felt that way.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Since I don't have a car and I had nowhere to flee, the wonderful Hispanic families, well, they're third generation, but just the same. One of them said, "Come with us. We'll bring you to our big house and we'll take care of you." Far away from the storm.
En otras palabras, nuestra casa es tu casa. Our house is your house.
Yes, exactly. So I was the beneficiary of just this policy that if someone's in need, just take them in.
However, we have to look carefully at what's involved in no other remedy. We have to look carefully at what's involved in imminent danger. In a catastrophe, it's pretty doggone obvious. But when we look at worldwide migration patterns, it requires some kind of public policy. And the public policy is going to be imperfect. But better that it be generous than that it be stingy and reeking of a kind of absolutist attitude towards private. Don't you agree?
No, there's a terrible static on the phone.
Hello?
Hello?
There was for a minute.
Okay, I'm not hearing static, but from time to time
I do appreciate that.
Go ahead, anybody that can.
This balance between protecting private property, because we recognize that that's just kind of the best way to arrange society for a lot of reasons. But also recognizing that, and I appreciate that statement, that property needs to be used well, and it needs to be used to help others. And I hope that with when it comes to immigration, we do need to recognize that or I'd like it if we did recognize that our nation is great, but one of the things that makes us great is the words on the Statue of Liberty and extending aid to refugees and welcoming strangers. I think that's what made our nation great, and so you bring up a great point there. I guess just a few more things about the platform. I think it is consistent with the consistent life ethic. We do call for an end to the use of private for-profit immigrant detention centers because that, I believe, has provided incentives for private companies to lobby for these kind of immigration crackdowns that do not serve the common good. Prolonged detention of people who are not, you've got situations where people were arrested and released from jail, and the jail would release them on their own recognizance, and ICE would come get them, and they're in ICE detention for 3 months on the taxpayer's dime. And that's, people before profit is something else we're kind of going for here. To Rhonda's earlier point about, kind of this fear that voting for, a third party, like the American Solidarity Party, would take away a vote from a pro-life candidate, that what I would like to point to is the potential in a situation where you would have a pro-life candidate who is anti-immigrant, which is exactly what we have, what it looks like we're going to be facing here in Virginia in the upcoming Senate elections. I would point to the potential for a fear of splitting the vote as a motivator for both parties to, or both candidates to kind of walk back from the edge. If say, we run someone, against in the Senate race that we've got coming up in Virginia, and it looks like Ted Cruz, not Ted Cruz, I'm drawing a blank on his name, Corey Stewart.
He's everywhere.
Is going to be, might not exactly have the Catholic vote on lockdown because of his pro-life position, or his anti-abortion position anyway. Maybe he'll back down from his hardline, degrading statements about immigrants.
I see. Okay, that's very interesting. That's very important.
And same with the candidates. When I announced my candidacy for the House of Delegates to my Democrat friends, who I thought would be supportive of it, because they were not. They were terrified that I would split the Democratic vote, and I thought, finally I said, okay, you know what? If you're so scared, I said, you're gonna make someone who you agree with on just about everything except for one issue lose. And I said, okay, you know what? A, I don't agree with him on all but one issue. I'm more liberal than him on most issues. And B, if you're scared that one little issue is enough to make him lose, maybe you need to rethink your stance. It's not a little issue to a lot of people.
Oh, very good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm known for that.
Well, I think if you were running near me, I'd lick envelopes for you.
Whoa!
Now
listen, the campaign is not that broke. We would provide sponges that have been moistened appropriately. Our stipends sent in month after month will not be wasted. I know we're very close to the end, and I would just like to make a reference to the extraordinary good work that was done by Mark Swick and continues to be done by Louise Swick at Casa Juan Diego in Houston. I wonder how they are today in Houston. Now, Mark died, it's getting to be about 3-4 months ago. But their focus for many, many years has been on helping in immediate ways immigrants coming into the Houston area. And they had widespread and have widespread contacts with priests throughout Mexico and Central America. Now, of note is that the Zwicks were on record and reaffirmed this policy. You really ought to stay where you are because you have no idea of what you're getting into. Crossing, especially people from Central America crossing through Mexico, which makes Texas, I think, look like a pretty good place. But the Zwicks discouraged, for broad reasons, namely the destruction involved of local cultures. They discouraged immigration, but they always welcomed immigrants. And they have been doing a yeoman's work for a good 30 years on this question. So I before we end.
There's terrible static right now. Jim, there's terrible static now.
I'm not getting static, and I can hear you loud and clear, but I think sometimes when Mitzi speaks, I'm not hearing her.
No, I'm getting static and delay from your voice. Well, okay.
Well, Sebastian will have to fix everything.
Oh, okay. Well, this is very informative, and I'm sure even though my examples might be far out or unusual, I'm sure many people have the same questions in their back of their mind reading the platform. So I hope it's helpful.
I'm sure it is. Well, 4 minutes left to go. We need to launch our poor prayers to the heavens.
Yes.
Rhonda, will you lead the prayer?
Sure, if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
I can, loud and clear.
Okay, because you're not clear, but maybe I'm clear. Oh, okay. Oh, dear Jesus, as many have pointed out, your parents were immigrants to Egypt. They knew about bad government. They knew about persecution. And so we beg you to help us as we work on this platform for this new party. We beg you to find the right words to use to express our hopes and help me and others like me to avoid becoming so pessimistic that we become cynical, where we need to use that same energy for promoting the good. Amen.
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 And we also ask for help for cockeyed optimists and rosy-eyed romantics.
I'll just let you guys know a statue I have on my desk right under my computer monitor and have had in my office ever since I started practicing law is that of St. Jude.
Oh, very nice. Okay.
Of desperate cases of things almost despaired of. And he's here with me right now. So, and I've had little doubt that he's been with my clients on many occasions as well. There have been many things happen that should not have happened, but have interceded to keep them safe. And after a few years of doing this kind of work, it's really strengthened my belief that God is I think sometimes he's walking with these people just like he was walking with his people in Egypt, or as they on their way as they escaped Egypt.
Well, we're out of time, and thank you, Mitzi. Thank you, Dr. Rhonda. Thank you, Jim. Dr. Jim, and we'll be back next week, same time, same station, with another edition of our program. And in the meantime, may God bless us, protect us from all evil, and bring us to everlasting life.
Amen.
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 We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.